Hello, everyone. As we continue to celebrate Black History Month, on behalf of Moaa, I wanted to welcome you all to our second webinar session titled Mental Health, Supporting Athletic Department Employees. Mental health as a whole has become a very hot topic in the last few years, specifically in athletics department. In the athletic departments throughout the country, we've tried to really focus in on the mental health of our student athletes and how we can best serve them. But as time goes on, we are beginning to realize as athletic department staff, we need to focus in on our own mental health because of the famous saying we've all heard, you can't pour from an empty cup. So joining us today in our discussion on how we can best support athletic department employees are Dr. Stephanie Coakley and Mr. Marvin Burton-Cornish. Dr. Stephanie Coakley is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Mental Health, Wellness, and Performance at Temple University. Prior to her role, she worked as a Master Resilience Trainer, performance expert with the United States Army. She was stationed at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center and Fort Belvoir in the Washington, D.C. metro area. An experienced and certified mental performance consultant, she is also the founder and director of Maximum Mental Health Training Associates, which is a sports performance consulting business. Dr. Coakley has worked with the Super Bowl champion the Philadelphia Eagles from 2015 to 2017 as the clinician and rookie success program facilitator, as group doctor for the NBA pre-draft combine, and as the NBA G League team awareness facilitator from 2015 to 2017. Dr. Coakley earned both her bachelor's degree in psychology and master's degree in counseling psychology from Temple University, and received her PhD in sport and exercise science with a concentration in sports psychology from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Now for Marvin Burton-Cornish Jr. Burton-Cornish is the Assistant Athletic Director for Student Athlete Development at the illustrious Morgan State University. Cornish recently concluded 30 years of service to the nation as an active duty soldier in the United States Army and a civilian stint in the White House and the Department of Veteran Affairs. The second of 3 generations to graduate from Bowie State University, Cornish created the Bulldog Rookie Symposium as part of his character development program for the Bulldogs football team, where he served as the Student Athlete Development Engagement and Wellness Coordinator for 11 years. As part of the football staff, Cornish won 3 consecutive conference titles and mentored over 60 professional All-American and All-Conference players. This includes the back-to-back Doug Williams Offensive and Black College Player of the Year. His focus as assistant AD is to provide meaningful and holistic programming for 300 plus student athletes and their coaches that include but are not limited to emotional intelligence, crucial conversations, leadership development, athletic identity, and transition after sports. So I wanted to thank you both for joining us today for this crucial conversation. So to jump right in, my first question for both of you. Can you discuss the stressors that are impacting the mental health of athletics department employees?
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. And before I get started, I'll take that question, at least a part of it. Thank you to Moaa and to Oyen and Teresa for this opportunity. And thanks to all of you for being here to talk about this very important topic, because we all have mental health and we can't ignore it. And if we do, that generally becomes problematic for us. So I'm really glad to see so many people on, and hopefully this helps you in some way. So the question was, what are some of the stressors? I think one of the things that, while it might be easy to forget the pandemic, because that was all we wanted to do when we were in it, is to be out of it, and it seems to have moved on. That was a major stressor for athletic department personnel. First and foremost, in our communities, we lost a lot of lives, and we were constantly being bombarded initially with all the numbers of people dying, all the images. And because we weren't in our offices, we had a front row seat to, like, a friend of mine calls it trauma porn. I know that might be inappropriate, but like we had a front row seat to death and a lot of loss. And so for some of us, for many of us, that was traumatic. So the pandemic, I think that the stressors associated with it continue to be with us, and they will be with us and our student athletes for probably the foreseeable future. So the grief and loss, the isolation associated with the pandemic. Human beings are meant to connect. And when we went into the houses in March of 2020, it took away something very meaningful for our well-being, that ability to like be in touch with people, go into the office, go to the stores, go to games. That all went away. Significant impact on our mental health, especially as we were like dealing with a trauma, which was the pandemic, the uncertainty of it. Other things associated with the pandemic were not only loss of life, but loss of our identities. For many of the folks on the call, like your work is you are your work. And, you can no longer be that person. You might have had to fall in line with another part of your identity that you may have been ignoring or maybe not given as much attention to. So all of these things were difficult to cope with for many people. Loss of structure. I walked by my kitchen and that became my office, and I could do work at 2 a.m, which for my employer, that might have been great, but for me, not so much, because at 2 a.m, that means I'm not getting rest. So there were just so many things associated with the pandemic that were stressors for athletic department, for everybody. But in this space, a lot of identity was lost, sense of structure was lost, the connection to community, our identity as professionals in this space. I want to say something else. Oh yeah, job security for many athletic departments. Because we lacked our revenues, like I know at Temple, we had to do budget cuts and there was talk of job loss, but we do know across the landscape, many people, there may be some folks on this line now who may have lost a job and now have a job in athletics, but that's hard. And when all these compounded or cumulative losses take place, it puts us at risk for serious, not only mental health, but health conditions, because your mind and your body are connected. And I always like to say that we had the pandemic amplified or exposed the mental health problems that we have in our country. So if you had anxiety and depression when the pandemic came, chances are that was exacerbated. And then when I say if you had anxiety and depression, untreated anxiety and depression, I want to be specific. But if you didn't, that you were at greater risk for, starting or beginning a mental health condition like anxiety, substance abuse, depression. And when we talk about lots of anxiety and lots of depression, lots of loss, we talk about hopelessness. And we all know that when people are, well, we may not know this, but when people feel hopeless, that can lead to truly poor outcomes. So I'll stop there because that was a lot and heavy. But I also want to mention, while we're talking about some of this stuff, if any of it's triggering to you, please make sure you're taking care of yourselves. If you need to get up and walk around, if you need to take some deep breaths, you need to roll your shoulders, because I do, please take care of yourselves.
To add to what Dr. Coakley said, I too thank Moaa for this opportunity and thank everyone for joining the call today. So good afternoon as well. Some of the things that stood out to me were some of the politics and social justice issues that were taking place across the nation. So adding to the pandemic, some of the feelings that came out of that, there were some race-based traumas, either from childhood or other life situations that began to, surface that definitely had an impact on those associated with athletic departments. But, I think the biggest thing that I have seen, and I've been with Morgan now since November, but I spent 11 years with Bowie, even from a part-time basis. And I think the 24/7 work environment that exists within athletics, because you're consistently trying to find how do you balance taking care of yourself without feeling as though you're either abandoning your student athletes while trying to maintain whatever your schedule may be, or sometimes even abandoning your colleagues as far as balancing the work that's taking place within your department, regardless of what division it may be or what conference it may be. One of the things that I'm interested in finding from those that are on the call are, what are some of the ways that you intentionally disconnect without feeling guilty about that? So what are some of the ways you intentionally disconnect guilt-free? Again, being in the job only since November, it's been full speed ever since, but I decided this week, just within this week, Tuesday, we had Magic Johnson visit the campus and spend time with our men's and women's basketball teams. And coming from a protocol background, there were some things here at the athletic department that I saw from my background that I was like, kind of like doing double dutch, where I'm like, should I jump in and help? But I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I don't want to see this go badly, but then it's none of my business. So that type of thing. But having 3 different visits taking place this week, normally I would have just kept going, but I decided, you know what, I need to take a day this week because I'm mentally and physically tired, not of the work, but because of the work, if that makes sense. I'm not tired of doing the job, but I'm a little, burned down this week from doing the job on a day-to-day basis at a certain level. On top of when your student athletes may come into the office and you see a difference in their behavior, you see their body language is not right. So it may not be a 2-minute conversation. You may need to have an unlimited time frame conversation with them, which is tough when you also have a schedule that you're trying to keep. So me being new as a full-time employee in athletics, I'm definitely interested to see from those on the line, like what are some of the tools and tactics, best practices, or even lessons learned that if you could share, that would be great.
I'll give y'all a few seconds to comment in the chat before I move on. All right. So if anyone, yes. Scheduling time for exercise is huge. I just started doing that a couple weeks ago. I blocked out an hour to go work out with our trainers downstairs because I know when I get home, it's not happening. Don't schedule back-to-back meetings. Place phone on do not disturb. Leave my laptop at home. Yes. Making my physical and mental health a priority. Yes. Not allowing to compromise my time. That's something I still need to work on. So that is awesome that you're able to do that. All right, so moving on to the next question that I have for y'all. What barriers exist when it comes to having mental health conversations in the workplace?
One of the things I feel is the largest aspect of that is just really stigmas, basically stigmas that exist. There are cultural stigmas, there are societal stigmas, all different types. I did just some research on my own, just thinking, of the actual descriptions from a bunch of different stigmas that I wanted to share with anybody. There were 7 that I came up with off of the National Association for Mental Illness website. So it talked about public stigma, when the public endorses a negative stereotype or prejudice. That's one of the things I see with student athletes, because of course, a lot of what they do is on social media. A lot of their life is based around social media. And, I came to find that to be one self-stigma. A person with a mental illness or substance use disorder that internalizes that public stigma. So that's also an issue. I found perceived stigma, the belief that others have negative cognizance about people with mental illness. So therefore, a big reason why someone may feel like, I don't want to be tagged with that type of title. Coming from a military background, I know that's a big thing from the standpoint of those of us that have PTSD, for instance. While on active duty, that was something that a lot of people shied away from, because you never want to feel like you are a weak link on the team or whatever the case may be. So despite what you may have gone through, what you may have seen and experienced, PTSD while you're on active duty, and definitely when you exit active duty, is a huge thing that you just consistently feel like you don't want to be labeled with, because even in the civilian workplace, we feel as though if our civilian colleagues know that we have PTSD, the minute that maybe we disagree with something that's going on or disagree with an individual, they almost verbalize to you, oh, well, we don't want to get you upset, as if to say you would respond differently than anybody else that may be in disagreement. Label avoidance, just talked about that a little bit, but that's one of the most harmful forms of stigma. It's because it's when a person chooses not to seek mental health treatment to avoid being assigned a stigmatizing label. There's stigma by association, which occurs when the effects of stigma are extended to someone who may be linked or aligned with the person that has mental health difficulties. There's structural stigma, institutional policies or other societal structures that result in decreased opportunities for people with mental illness or, structural stigma. So again, worried about how you're labeled in the workplace. Health practitioner stigma. Anytime a health professional allows stereotypes and prejudice about mental illness to negatively affect, a particular patient's care. So, you have those stigmas, and then there's other barriers that you find associated with seeking help and resources, be it vulnerability or lack of understanding. And then sometimes you may feel hopeless and isolated because you've identified that you are dealing with something. A lot of us that are in the athletic administration lane are former student athletes, right? And during the time that you're a student athlete, one of the things that I think marries us and military are that we have that gladiator mentality to continue to push through. And so anytime something is associated with our minds and how we think, if I'm overwhelmed with something and I confess to that, I don't want to be viewed as weak, because of course I'm, 6'3", 240 linebacker or whatever the case may be. If I say, I'm dealing with depressions or I'm dealing with anxiety or just, I just don't feel like myself, I'm worried about how I'm going to be viewed. So I see that that's one of the stigmas that, consistently exists within athletics.
Thank you so much for that. I also, hearing you speak, I thought about the structural stigma and kind of like how you were saying earlier, how we're kind of conditioned for this 24/7 lifestyle. So kind of learning how to break out of that, because again, we don't want to be viewed as weak. We know that there's always work to be done, and we never want to get behind on it. We still want to be there for the students that we're serving. So that was a really awesome point. So part B to that, how have you seen these barriers broken down in athletics over the last few years?
Start off and then I'll pass to Stephanie. I think the fact now we have more athletes coming forward and not only stating that they have dealt with or continue to deal with different mental illnesses, but just, just coming forward and saying, you know what, I'm going to step back from competition for a minute, regardless of what stage it is, i.e., Simone Biles or Naomi Osaka, who decided, you know what, I need to take care of me first. And my safety is in jeopardy if I don't do this. I always look at Michael Phelps, and I look at different athletes that unfortunately, you spoke earlier, about athletic identity. And I think sometimes we lose track of how attached to our athletic identity we actually are, especially when we are now removed from the sport. We know one day it's going to happen, but I take Michael Phelps, for example. You don't really see Michael Phelps in any endorsements unless it's, I don't know, maybe Speedo or something like that, that is only swimming specific. So once he was removed from swimming, if you'll notice, if you look at his background, that's when he started kind of spiraling, because now I've got this time on my hands. I don't have anything else that I really prepared myself for after the Olympics. And so I'm pulling in the wrong straws and in the wrong weeds to try to establish a new identity. So having other athletes come forward before it becomes too late or before it becomes too negative of a situation, where now I'm having to explain my actions of why I was arrested or detained, or why I'm on ESPN on the ticker underneath for doing something counterproductive. I like the fact that a lot of athletes, knowing that they are role models, are coming forward and talking about addressing mental health.
Thank you, Cornish. I would just add that one of the barriers, one of the most hopeful, I guess, barriers that I've seen that have gone down is that now athletic departments are hiring people like me. In the athletic department and the landscape, like, there are folks embedded now who have the expertise, and it's, primarily for student athletes, but if a resource exists, anybody can take advantage of what I know, or what a counterpart I might have at your institution might know. So I think that's huge, because it's one step closer to normalizing this thing. We have athletic trainers all through our athletic departments, and that's very normal. We don't have mental health clinicians at that level yet. And I say yet because I know it's coming, because the way I started is that we all have mental health, and we cannot continue to neglect our mental health, because, you wouldn't let somebody walk around with a torn ACL. But there are many people, there are 35 people on this call right now. So if we go according to the numbers, 1 in 5 people will have a mental health condition that is diagnosable and needs treatment. Whether that happens or not is beside the point. But so that means 6 to 7 of us on this call. Did I do my math right? Somebody check my math. All right. So, I think that is a good news story about this. Athletic departments are hiring people to prioritize, which is showing an investment in the whole athlete, the mind and the body, the academics, every aspect of the athlete's identity. So I think that's great.
Thank you so much for that. So to keep it pushing so we can get through these questions, what can we do as a staff or as staff in athletic departments to improve our own mental health as well as support for our colleagues?
Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit on a little small box right now, because words matter, and we just talked about all these types of stigma. And when we use language like crazy and insane and psycho and nuts and bananas and just some of that language, it is truly stigmatizing to somebody who might feel chaotic in their mind. or they may not feel it, like they legitimately have been diagnosed with major depression or a generalized anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder. So when we use words like, oh my gosh, I'm so OCD, like, while I think we know what you mean, it is problematic. So I guess the first thing to do is, because somebody in your department might be struggling with their mental health, and when you use words like that, it has the potential to further isolate and alienate that person. And I know that's not what we want to do to our colleagues. So that's one thing. And along with that is, if you are feeling a way, then express it. It's important to name our emotions because we cannot change what we don't name. If you are feeling sad or disappointed or overwhelmed or excited or overjoyed, optimistic, grateful, like these are all words that mean something, then people can have more empathy for you because they understand how you're feeling. And everybody has felt all of those things before. So I would encourage you all not only to use appropriate language when referring to somebody who has a mental health disorder. Stephanie has depression, not Stephanie's depressed, and not Stephanie's crazy, or she's touchy, or any, the words, the euphemisms, and then naming your emotion. So how you feel. I think I don't know when it changed, when it happened, but I hear people every day, all day say something like, I feel like Teresa doesn't like me, or I feel like Temple University is out to get me. When you say that, you are feeling a thought. Teresa doesn't like me is a thought. Teresa doesn't like me is a feeling, is not a feeling. So I feel ignored. That might be a thing, but it's not, I feel Teresa doesn't like me. So just being cognizant of the words we use to describe things like emotions. And when we hear other people say some of these things, maybe encourage them to think about the implication of a word like crazy, and if they say that they think something, ask them, well, tell me how you really feel. And have them think about it a little bit more, because you'll get really better information with one word than a string of them. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, please put it in the chat and I'll try to further explain. Another thing that we can do is we can get training. We all work on college campuses, so there are resources across campus that we could invite into our athletic departments to train our staff. And when we learn, and when our staff learns, we are like raising the bar. So we have, there's a intervention called QPR, and QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. And it's about a 90-minute training. And really what that is designed to do is to help people know how to listen out for somebody who sounds really hopeless and like they might do harm to themselves, and be able to confidently ask the question, do you want to hurt yourself? Have you been having thoughts of suicide? That's life-saving, and it takes 10 minutes. So QPR training, at Temple, our Wellness Resource Center does it, our Health Promotion Department, but I'm sure somebody on your department, on your campus, can provide QPR, and certainly in your community, they can provide QPR. I think we have a link to the QPR Institute that we're dropping into the chat. You can also partner with your social work department or your counseling department and invite either students or faculty to come in and just choose a topic. Maybe it's a topic that is resonating in your athletic department among staff, maybe burnout. Maybe have somebody come in and talk about that. Another thing, you definitely all have access to insurance. So maybe having somebody or going through your EAP program, making sure you know how to access that resource. We all have access to insurance for our health care. So we also have insurance for our mental health care, but our institutions offer employee assistance programs as well. Those tend to be more short and brief sessions, but most times that's all we need to avoid something kind of spiraling out of control. And then, just going on along with that, maybe having consistent conversations. The way things get better is, and the way stigma gets reduced is when we take things out of the shadows and bring them right out into the light. So maybe having like lunch and learns where we talk about, like I said, the burnout, where we talk about anxiety. Guess what? Everybody has anxiety. It's the problematic and the chronic anxiety that's problematic. But everybody has anxiety. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about coping strategies for it. So these are just some ideas. And if anybody is doing something out there that you think the rest of us could benefit from, please share.
Yeah, from a student athlete standpoint, Stephanie, thank you. Since I've been here, a couple of things that I've thought about creating. One being a student athlete mental health council. Student athletes are the most high profile students on campus. So everyone looks at them a lot of times as being invincible, so on and so forth. And of course, we have our own ego that's a part of our athletic identity, or we wouldn't be able to excel at the sport that we're in. So by having a student athlete mental health council, one, it gives student athletes the opportunity to talk amongst themselves about things and feelings they're all probably dealing with. One of the consistencies I've run across is that student athletes will talk to me about how they consistently bury what they're feeling because they need to perform. So hearing others say that out loud and how to tackle that, I think will help them. And then for them to be the face of an information table talking about what I call mental wealth instead of mental health. Also, I want to partner with our international students office and create something between them and our international students. I spoke with one this morning that's from South America, and she was saying from a cultural standpoint, the differences of what she's accustomed to at home, which she hasn't been home in over a year, and having that support circle that when she's become overwhelmed or whatever the case may be, they were there for her. But now that she's been here in the States, she felt like those of us here are more superficial, and she's had a hard time adjusting to that. But I said, well, have you ever talked to just some of the traditional students here on campus that, are international students? Have you ever gone to any of the international society functions? And she said, no, I've never thought about that. And I said, that may be an outlet for you, because you may run across other traditional students here on campus that are from the same country as you, and that will bring you a little closer to home. So, that's one of the things that I want to work on with the student athletes to help them move through this process as well.
Thank you all so much for that. And Dr. Coakley, I appreciate you kind of, and Bert, really like honing in on moving across campus, especially like for us those who are in low or underfunded resource institutions. That's the quickest way that we can kind of get the support that we need. So that was awesome.
I just want to jump in real fast. And I do that because our department is brand new. This is like the 5th year of the department. We are underfunded. Like mental health programs, like while we might have people in our departments, they don't have the funding that like some other parts of the athletic department have. And so, us therapists, we're pretty resourceful because we often find ourselves in underfunded environments. And so that's by necessity as well. So that I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. And then moving on to our next question. What can athletics departments what, like, I guess leaders do to help their staff?
Well, there's a lot there as well. You know, we definitely want to be solution focused today. And one of the things that, you know, athletic departments can do and leaders can do in athletic departments is make sure that their staff or the staff uses their vacation time. So I'm gonna just let that.
I'm gonna add to that, and I think when it comes to the vacation time, I want to add to that, not according to the academic calendar. Take vacation time when you need it, not when everybody else is off campus too. And okay, now here are these hours, let me go ahead and plug them in. No, I think there are times that you need to take time for you when you need it, not when it's scheduled for everyone. So I just wanted to add that.
No, no
Definitely.
problem. Absolutely. So I just want to let that marinate because we are probably all pretty high achieving folks here who work according to this 24/7 athletic cycle and probably give a lot of time, AKA money, back to the institution. So I really want to encourage you all to set a goal today to look at your vacation and start planning to use it all before the end of the academic or the fiscal year, however that works for you. Another thing that we can do, and we learned this during the pandemic, is that many of our jobs can get done at home. Like we have meetings on Zoom all the time. And there's a lot that goes into commuting to work that takes our energy, that can influence our ability to perform at our job at a high level. So maybe hybrid opportunities, helping staff get some of that work from home when possible, or at certain times in the calendar year. So maybe off season, in season, et cetera, but having options for how the work gets done. I think at the end of the day, as leaders, we just want to make sure that the work gets done in, when it's supposed to be done by. And then, maybe things like having a special place on campus or in your athletic department where people can go and do meditation, or a quiet room, or a lounge where people can gather. Those are some things that, because we tend to gather, but it's usually like at a game where a lot of stuff's going on, and maybe people have to work as well. So it's not truly like that opportunity to connect, that opportunity to rest and recharge, even if it's just for 15 minutes. And particularly when the tempo is high in our athletic department. So conferences and those types of times, beginning of seasons, end of seasons, when the tempo is high. And I would encourage leaders to solicit feedback for what they need. It's way better to give you what you need or to give anybody what they need when they tell you what they need. So as leaders, soliciting, as I said, feedback, like what do you need in order to be your best self mentally and physically in this arena.
Bert, did you want to add anything?
I mean, Dr. Coakley really touched on things, but as we evolve as staff within the athletic departments, I think sometimes we have to lead the way in how we want our departments to change. And so by leading by example, we can talk today about, we need to take time off, or we need to do this, we need to do that. I think one of the ways of supporting each other, I think with us saying, we could telework and have virtual office hours, for example, we often feel like if I don't have that face-to-face interaction with my student athletes, their critical moments, I may miss them. But it worked in some ways during the pandemic, because a lot of what we were doing was virtually. So you set up virtual office hours where they can schedule to speak with you, or if they need to say, hey, I need to just talk to you real quick, you can still do that. It's just virtually, and you can tell them, okay, we can follow up, personally when I get back on campus tomorrow. But for the time being, what's going on, whatever the case may be. But definitely, we are going to have to be the ones that lead the change and show what we need, why we need it, and how we can go about accomplishing it. That's one of the things that, I've learned early in life is if I bring something to the table and say, I really don't feel we should be doing it this way, it can't be a period at the end of that. It needs to be a semicolon. However, here's an idea I'd like to offer. So we can't say, well, my department is not doing anything when it comes to mental health. Well, what if we presented them as an option? Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of us walk around with the gladiator, not only the gladiator mentality, but the gladiator behavior that we can push through, we'll get it done. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it, without showing how much that's consistently depleting our energy flow. So we have to be comfortable verbalizing what we need.
And I would add another strategy is to do campaigns and your messaging. So, as leaders, if you say mental health is important, like what else? Like words are great, but action is definitely what we look to for confirmation that those words are truly meant. And so I think one of the things that we've done over here at Temple last few years is it's simple. You just put some stuff on a t-shirt. But now every time somebody walks around with this mental health is health t-shirt, or this year's campaign is be kind to your mind. So every time somebody sees that, like in the athletic department, it's a reminder like, hey, I need to take a vacation day, or hey, I need to ask for a hybrid work from home day, or hey, I need to something that is associated with staying above the curve, or above the spiral, or however you want to describe it, but something proactive.
It's definitely something I'll add to that is, and you hit the main word, being proactive. So as the athletic director for the day, my stance is moving forward. Every employee will take a virtual day bi-weekly. So Stephanie will be Mondays, Teresa will be Tuesdays, Oyen will be Wednesdays, I'll be Thursdays, Nancy Lake will be Fridays. That allows us to then, as a staff, be able to plan. And instead of feeling like I don't want to be away from my office because then I'm putting my work on my colleagues. Okay, if it's a matter of you really need to be out, and we're all academic advisors, for example, here are the things that I was working on yesterday. Here are the people that may come past and to talk about a class they need to drop, whatever the case may be. Being proactive, letting your colleagues know, hey, here's something that may come up, or a student athlete that may come past because I'm not in today, and not working virtually. I'm completely off. I think Nancy Lake had put in there, place her phone on do not disturb. And Stephanie said, I leave my laptop at home. That sounds good, or leave it at work. And a lot of times that sounds good, but then we're tempted to still look back because we're worried about, I forgot this one thing. If you forgot something, write it down in your reminders as something that you can tackle when you get in tomorrow. But don't turn that laptop back on, because the minute somebody sees that green light, guaranteed you're going to get an email. Oh, I thought you were off today, but now that I see you're online, let me ask you this question. We need to just completely walk away from that.
That was sensational. All right. So I'm going to open up the chat to any of our participants who may have questions.
If anybody wants to unmute their microphones and ask a question as well, that works too. But if you would be more comfortable using the chat, feel free to do so.
Well, while we wait for any comments, I want to ask if there are any actual athletic directors that are on the call today, if they could maybe either vocalize or put in the chat some of the ways that they're looking to support, their staff within their department, according to some of the things that we're talking about now, that if they're already doing them, how they put them in place, lessons learned, best practices, anything along that line.
We do have one question. Angel asks, how do you manage this as an area or a department head for yourself? So like, for those of you who oversee, the two of you who oversee a department, how do you manage this with your staffs?
I'm a big practice what you preach type of person, but of course, I mean, with some exceptions, but I do make sure that people are taking their vacation days, because to me that's like, it's equivalent to money. So
Part of your
you're giving money
compensation.
back. So I really encourage folks to take their vacation days and use them for vacation. So in our like PPDs or our reviews, I'll say, so when are you taking a vacation? We'll plan a vacation, because you have to, that's important. For us as mental health providers, like we take on all this, everybody's stuff. So like we have to take care and recharge our batteries. Another thing that I do is we do little social opportunities at work when possible. We meet a lot as a team and we find out, like, so it's not all work all the time. So even in our meetings, I dedicate like pieces of the meeting to talk about either something people are grateful for, or like, what are you doing this weekend? Like something that it's not like the grind. Because if you pull, I have a rubber band in my office. If you pull a rubber band and you never put it back together, it's going to break. And so I use that visual so that people understand, like, okay, you can think that's a winning strategy to just keep going hard and keeping that gladiator outfit on, but that's not a winning strategy. And what will happen is that there will be a failure, whether physically or mentally. And to be ahead of that is really where you set yourself up for best outcomes, to be proactive. And sleep, everybody. Sleep is something that we don't get enough of. So I wear a Whoop band. I don't know, for some of you all, like it's a real challenge to get enough sleep. And until you start tracking your sleep, you don't even know how terrible it is. You just kind of have an idea. But once you know better, you should be doing better. And so for me, I have this Whoop band on and I track my sleep and try to make sure, at least I'm trying to. So setting the goal, sometimes I don't make it, but these are some of the things I do for my mental health. And then encourage the staff to do the same thing.
That's great. Thank you, Stephanie. Burton, do you have anything you would like to add before we move on to the next question?
No, I'm anxious to get to the next question.
All right, then. Well, then I'll hit you with it. Are there any suggestions or questions that you recommend asking in a culture survey or when soliciting feedback from staff?
And the question I just came to mind was, I would word it like this: if you could make a change in the department, what would it look like and how would you implement it? Simple. Not just what would you do, but how would you implement it? Because a lot of times we kind of do the dump truck aspect of things. We dump it and then step back. But there needs to be a partnership there. And I think by asking that aspect of it, now you're inclusive, because now you're telling that person, I want to know from your thoughts how this best fits you. And I don't want to assume. I'm asking you to tell me, and that way you're getting, critical feedback and you're providing buy-in.
It's fantastic. Our next question, men of color often will not ask for help what can we do to break that stigma?
Lead by example, period. Lead by example and bring somebody with you. Bring somebody with you, because there's a difference between dragging someone to a situation or putting your arm around them and walking with them, right? And that's an excellent point. Men of color, we do not ask for help. Some of it is part of our blueprint, where we were raised, how we were raised, what we were raised by, and what masculinity looks like in that environment, in that community, in that space. But one of the things that I just recently shared, it takes a strong person to come forward and say that they need help. The weak person is the one that does not, but they realize they need it.
Yeah, changing the narrative. First of all, we have to change a lot of narratives, but it's a sign of strength to get help. Once again, I go back to, you wouldn't walk around with a torn ACL because that doesn't make any sense. So what allows you to walk around with weighty and unrelenting depression or out of control anxiety? Something that's impairing your ability to function on a day-to-day as a parent, as a staff member. So it is a sign of strength. So that's the narrative. I invite you all to try to reframe too. And then the other part is, people don't communication is not just verbal. They are telling you they need help. They just aren't using words. So maybe give them the information that they're giving you through the actions that says it, it seems as though you are asking for help, because that's what they're doing. They're just not using words. If a young man is constantly fill in the blank, a young Black man is constantly fill in the blank, getting into fights or relying on substances, they're telling you they need help. They just don't know how, they're not using the words. So you can just help them with those words. It seems like you're asking for help. And then to Cornish's point, yes, lead by example, be vulnerable. Hey man, I remember when I was in my senior year and I got injured, and people want to feel that sense of connection. A lot of times, I will tell you, I hear it all the time. When another person says something, it's like a release, because they thought it was just them feeling this way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you both for sharing. One last question. How do you create a culture to initiate supportive measures for mental health when you might have some resistance at the top?
I'll jump in really quickly. I say, if you have interns in your department working with you, have your interns create a survey with language that they know generationally, those within the student athlete community would feel comfortable with. Have them create that survey, do a survey amongst all the teams, get the coaches buy-in to do it, get the responses back, look at what's taking place, develop at least a draft plan of how you would like to address it, then take it to the senior officials in your administration and say, hey, here's a need that is coming straight from the student athletes. Here are my suggestions, best practices, lesson learned, whatever the case may be, and ask for their support from that way. At that point, you have now shown, here's a need. The onus is now on them to provide that support.
That's great. One more question. March 3rd is Employee Appreciation Day. How do you have any suggestions for ways to celebrate employees?
Have the senior athletic department officials go around to people's offices, shake their hands, thank them for everything they do, go to some of the practices that may be taking place, stop practice for maybe 2-3 minutes, let the student athletes know that they're appreciated, that you acknowledge that, it's not easy being a student first and athlete. So just things along that line.
I don't really have anything other to add on that, because I think that was a fantastic idea. Like people like to be appreciated for the work they do. I guess what I would add is say something specific, like so that they know that you were paying attention. Because an attaboy and a good job is not, we don't know what we did well. So how can we replicate that? But if you tell me, well, I saw that like for the last 2 weeks, you've been the one to clean up after everybody's gone. That keeps our department looking pristine.
Absolutely.
I saw that. Nice job.
Yeah. Somebody put it in the chat, celebrating your team throughout the year, not just on one day, does a lot. Whether they're quarterly lunches with your staff, holiday parties, those types of things, but just actually regularly saying thank you and being appreciative goes a long way.
We just, not too long ago, one of our student athletes said, oh, by the way, Thursday is National Hot Chocolate Day. Something we hadn't even, thought about. And it just so happened that one of our staff loves hot chocolate, all types. So he was like, you know what? Let's set up a table outside the academic center and we'll just have staff out there to serve hot chocolate to the student athletes as they walk by. I think it was cold and rainy that day and it was perfect, but it opened up a lot of dialogue about some other things too. So just kind of thinking outside the box of something as small as offering hot chocolate, and the amount of student athletes that came over was more than we had even expected, but they kept saying, you know what, this is pretty cool. We appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were all of the questions that we had in the chat. I want to thank everybody for joining us this last hour. I put in a link to our post-webinar survey. We would encourage everybody who attended to fill out their survey, provide us with some feedback, and so that we can make sure that future webinars are tailored to the needs of our organization. Also put in attached a Word document into the chat, which has links to some of the resources we discussed today, some of the feedback from the earlier question about how we disconnect, as well as some additional links that our panelists thought would be helpful for you all to use. So once again, thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.